So I'm from a pretty small country called Bajistan. But here's the catch. Bajistan is actually a part of America. Because as comedian Hassan Minhaj writes, there's white America, there's black America, and then there's Bajistan. And as a key member of the Bajistani people, I will speak up and say that we are way more practical than we are progressive. But being from Bajistan and moving to America, I quickly realized that being Bajistani makes you invisible. Because in this country where everything is sorted and polarized, anyone can fall between the lines. In reality, I'm actually from a pretty small town in India called Bhadrachalam. Population 80,000. I know, that's a small town in India. But moving here to Fairview in the 3rd grade, I quickly realized that I was the founding father of our local Bajistani population. Just 15 of us, figuring out new ways to be seen. Eventually, I did something irrational for an immigrant kid wanting to fit in, and I joined our school's speech and debate team, where I learned that the only way to stop being sorted by other people's assumptions of me was to start speaking for myself. Now, I'm not sure what the ideal TED Talk to adversity is, but I'm positive that my story alone isn't enough. Adversity is real, and I know what it feels like, but the adversity that I have felt is nothing compared to the adversity that I have seen, and eventually help solve. So, today, I want to show that the only way to overcome adversity is to overcome our fear of standing up and speaking out through 3 things. First, exploring the psychology behind why we shut down. Next, looking at the adversity in Erie. Before finally, creating some solutions where we can live our own stories to the fullest. So let me tell you about Bajistan's conflict resolution strategy. Because our model minority policy is pretty simple. Be quiet, work hard, and never ask your British neighbor what they meant by that comment. We haven't been asking for 200 years. But still, being Bajistani, I realized that overcoming adversity is pretty hard. Now, if anyone here has ever taken a psychology class, then they definitely know about the story of Kitty Genovese. In 1964, Kitty Genovese was brutally assaulted, raped, and murdered outside of her New York City apartment. 38 people reportedly heard or saw something, but almost none called for action. Coining the term bystander effect, psychologists Latan and Darley studied why. What they found wasn't cruelty, it was math. The more people present in a situation, the less likely any one of them feel responsible to speak up. They called it the diffusion of responsibility. But here's where it gets deeper. Because in adversity, people often look around first, and if they see that no one else is acting, then they conclude that maybe this isn't a problem after all. Psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance. Normal people call it a Thanksgiving dinner table. I mean, we know the story. You know, your uncle says something unhinged, everyone hears it, and then you debrief in the car. A room full of individual people, collectively deciding that action isn't just the right idea. But you're not silent in adversity because you don't care. You're silent in adversity because you're looking for permission to care. And everyone around you is looking for the same permission. Solomon Asch proved this in his 1961 experiment, the Asch paradigm, where a room of actors confidently gave the wrong answer to a pretty obvious question. And 75% of real people fell for it. Idiots, right? No, not because they didn't know the answer to the question, but it was more because the social danger of speaking up and being the only one to speak up was too hard. And neurology reveals another layer, because in adversity, our bodies have a 3rd response beyond fight or flight: freeze. Social danger triggers the same wiring as physical adversity. So, we freeze, and we don't know what to do. And silence just lets adversity continue. It leaves victims of adversity with a second wound, the one where the world saw, but decided not to act. But the same research shows how we can break the freeze. One dissenter in Asch's experiments dramatically reduced conformity by over 80%. It only takes one person to understand what's happening, to break the illusion that everything is working when it's not. And to Bajistan and its model minority policy, well, that worked for real people who had real reasons to keep their heads down. But survival strategies don't always scale. And what makes you invisible in one context can make you invisible in another. Now let's move on to Erie, Pennsylvania. Erie has 3 seasons: winter, construction, and a 2-week period in July where everyone acts like we're living in Miami. We're not. Because this place where everyone knows everyone feels less like a warning and more like warmth. Because when everyone knows everyone, those who don't fit the narrative aren't just visible, they're left out in a different way. In the summer of my senior year, I started working as an assistant teacher at the Urban Erie Center for Development Corporation, where I was teaching English as a second language to African refugees who had just been displaced in downtown Erie. Now, if there's anything I've learned from my Fairview teachers, it's that you're never supposed to have a favorite. But I had one. Her name was Budesi, 63-year-old Congolese refugee, whom I was told that learning English was her American dream. I remember mine and Budesi's first interaction like this. Me awkwardly covering my new summer buzz cut, and her struggling to pronounce the ABCs. Because before exchanging insecurities before hellos, I quickly realized how important it is to be a teacher. Because it's not in learning languages, it's being trusted with someone else's growth. But what I saw in that classroom was pluralistic ignorance being made structural. Lessons were being cut short by attorneys wanting to explain deportation procedures. Worksheets were Google translated because the gap was just too big to bridge otherwise. And elementary English quickly became a fear that they would never fit in. But then, one student dissented. A student started using Swahili alternatives for Pennsylvania German foods that no one could pronounce, like schnitzel. What is schnitzel? Another student started using Arabic denotation to overcome words for older students. The classroom stopped waiting for permission and created permission for themselves. And it's safe to say that Budesi learned English, learned how to write her name, and was one step closer to the American dream. Now, if that's what one small group of dissenters could do, imagine what we could all do together. The same notion showed up again in my junior and senior year when I was working at my local legislative office. Within the first 2 weeks of my term, Erie was met with a constitutional and civic crisis. Over 13,000 missing ballots were not located to Erie County. Every time voters would call the office to check where their ballots were, they were met with the same words: not received. But behind every not received, there was anger and indignation for a system that was meant to serve them. So me, along with other youth in our county, put the phone down and started knocking on doors, logging data, mapping ballots, and listening to people on their lawns while they described with real frustration and real dignity what it feels to be let down by a system that only gives them silence in return. Because in small-town USA, Erie, Pennsylvania, civic responsibility transcends party lines. Whether you are Democrat, Republican, or Independent, everyone deserves their inherent right to vote. And under the same idea, I recognize that the ballot crisis and the classroom were literally just the same story, the same way to overcome adversity, by dissenting and standing up. And in the same exact format, they got their ballots. So, what can we learn from this? More importantly, what can we do? Brené Brown says that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's understanding that something else matters more. But here's what her research doesn't say. Courage isn't individual, it's contagious. And if Erie is going to make that bridge from individual to collective, we need to start spreading that courage. Bridge. B-R-I-D-G-E. It starts with B, breaking assumptions. Not the loud, obvious ones, those are easy to spot. I'm talking about the ones that Harvard Project Implicit calls go below your awareness. The ones that shape whose name you matter to remember and whose hand you want to shake. Those are fixed with deliberate effort. Learn the name. Ask the question. Learn about people and their adversities. Not because it's politically required, but because it's the first gate, and you have the key. Then, we have to R, raise new voices. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant says that the most generative communities don't just create space. They actively sponsor people into rooms that they were never allowed to be in the first place. Think about what that means for a second. Budesi didn't need someone to feel sorry for her. What she needed was someone to hand her the marker and teach her English. In the same way, who in your life is standing at a door that you can open? Pull them through. But individual actions only go so far, which is why we also have to interrogate systems. 14,000 missing ballots is not a glitch. That was a system. That was never made anyone's problem to fix. So, make it your problem. And once you make it your problem, then D, demand accountability. Political scientist Arshan Fung says that the most equitable governments are mattered with presence, which means it's the ordinary people who stay up after the vote, who stay in the offices, and who let not received be the last word. It's the people that stand up and speak out, because you don't need a title to do that. You just need to stay in the room a little bit longer than they expected you to. And then we have to G, grow community. Decades of research on social capital show that trust is not inherited. Trust is built. Erie has everything it needs to build that trust, except for the belief that it's actually possible. What we need is one person acting like it's already true. Once all of that's complete, we have to E, expand the story of adversity. This country, this region, is too talented, too layered, and too diverse to be running on a story only built for some of its people. And about Bejistan, well, I owe you guys a little bit of truth. Because Bejistan is not based on the color of your skin, or where you're from, or if your parents packed you a lunch that got you stared at. Bejistan is based off of Hassan Minhaj's original term, which is the inability to act in adversity. Because despite Hassan Minhaj coining the term, we have all lived in Bejistan. We have all had that indifferent, beige opinion of not being able to stand up and speak out. For me, I joined speech and debate because it was the only way to stop being sorted by other people's assumptions. But the irony is that I had to leave Bejistan to do it. And in the same way, so do you. So leave Bejistan. Here's the mic. Stand up. Speak out. And just maybe, what we need in this country is not more people picking sides, but it's more Bejistanis. More of you building bridges. Thank you.